conference realignment, we talk a lot about it here on this channel. And when we talk about the effects of conference realignment, so often it's about Big 12, ACC, and then on down, like leagues getting rated. But that's not where it begins and ends, because even the big boys, even the Big 10 and the SEC, they feel the effects of conference realignment in real, tangible ways that hurt them. Back to the gentleman a second ago, Justin, saying here's something that would help the NCAA as a whole. Ditching all this wild, stupid realignment would be great for the NCAA as a whole, because it does not just hurt the Big 12 on down. It hurts everybody, SEC and Big 10 included. And we have two perfect examples of that right now. And it was entirely predictable. Everybody knew if you just did math, basically, the math equation would tell you, hey, teams are going to have to lose games in these new leagues, right? The concentration of power is going to put a lot more very good historical programs together. And that means some of them are going to lose more games than they want to. It's like literally impossible for that not to happen. And yes, that is the case. And we are finding out with two schools, one of whom Big 12 fans are very familiar with, that are suffering right now and dealing with this, and maybe sitting around thinking like, God, is this realignment thing like really what it was cracked up to be and worth it? Oklahoma was, I will just say, it was like great Twitter fodder for people to say, well, they're going to be the Nebraska of the SEC. This will go the same way that it did for Nebraska when they went to the Big 10. Oklahoma will fade back, become much more irrelevant, and they have lost their place atop the perch of the Big 12, where they were running it year in and year out. Now, I would argue they had already lost that perch with not winning it the last couple of years that they were in the league, but I digress. It was already starting to go down a bit there. But now Brent Venables is here in year 3, and for the second time in 3 years, I mean, they're just fighting to make a bowl game. And it's going to be a fight. I don't know if you've watched Oklahoma play football lately. They scored a whole 9 points on Saturday against South Carolina at home and lost 35-9. Their defense is pretty good, but some of those points came because their offense gave the defense points. And the offense is about as bad as it gets in FBS football right now. I mean, they're ranked in the hundreds in a bunch of different statistical categories right now. Today, there was a fall guy. It was Seth Luttrell. K-State fans will remember Seth Luttrell as the one-time apple of our eye, mine included, when he was winning games at North Texas and thinking that he was going to be the Bill Snyder replacement. He just got fired as Oklahoma's offensive coordinator. It was clearly a terrible hire because Oklahoma fits very much in that same category as like Utah, who we talked about earlier. You can say, hey, we've had a bunch of injuries at wide receiver. We're down to our wide receiver 6 or whatever as wide receiver 1. And you can say, well, Jackson Arnold hasn't been he wasn't quite what we thought he was. But you got to, if you're going to be an SEC program and you're someone that fancies yourself, hey, we go to the playoff and we win playoff games, you got to have more depth than that. You got to be better than that. You got to have something better than true freshman Michael Hawkins, who's just clearly not ready at this point. You've got to have better program infrastructure than that. You got to get an OC that is creative enough to figure something out. I mean, Jackson Arnold was a very highly recruited quarterback. Is it really that he is that bad, or do you just not have a staff that could figure it out? I mean, it's unacceptable for Oklahoma to be there if they are what they say they are or think they are. So they didn't have an SEC-ready roster. I mean, that's the harsh reality of this. Did not have an SEC-ready roster, did not have an SEC-ready coaching staff. I would tell you that was kind of obvious to me that Brent Venables was not going to be that dude as a head coach. Now, I'm also in a bit of a pickle here because I thought, well, he certainly is not going to live up to Lincoln Riley, and he has not lived up to Oklahoma version of Lincoln Riley, but it's a real race to the bottom between real Lincoln Riley or USC Lincoln Riley and Oklahoma Brent Venables right now. Neither one of them is feeling very good. More on Lincoln Riley in just a moment. But man, I mean, look down the road at Texas, who for decades was way behind Oklahoma in the Big 12. But Texas had almost its entire running back room go down this year. They lost Quinn Ewers for a couple of games, and it doesn't matter. Now, they didn't look great against Georgia, but they're still there in the top 10. They're not fighting and scrapping for a bowl game this year in the SEC. And that's what Oklahoma is doing. Conference realignment, man, it'll beat you up. Now, some of this is, as I said, a downfall that started in the Big 12 because I just don't think Oklahoma hired very well in replacing Lincoln Riley. But also some of it is, hey, they decided to go to the SEC, and Lincoln Riley did have that to an extent up and rolling. And he looked at it and said, I do think it's fair to say right now, and Joe Castiglione, Oklahoma's athletic director, said as much. Yeah, Lincoln really didn't seem to be keen on going to the SEC and doing battle there. So you made that decision, and conference realignment has consequences. And Lincoln Riley decided to leave. He wanted to go. Well, now you have consequences that he left. It left you to hire a defensive guy, which, year of our Lord 2024, I'm not usually on board with hiring a defensive head coach. I would rather have the offensive guy. But you course correct to the other side. You slobber over him working with linebackers in spring practice. And now here you are stuck with a $45 million buyout and a guy that for the second time in 3 years is going to be lucky to get you to a bowl game. I don't think Oklahoma is going to go through a stretch like Nebraska has. I don't think it will be that bad. I mean, Nebraska, need I remind you, is on the longest Power 5 bowl eligibility list streak. That's wild. I don't think Oklahoma's getting there. They have generally been a pretty well-run organization, and I'd like to think that they're not going to go through a series of choices like Bill Callahan and Mike Riley. I think they can do better than that. But this is also, on the other hand, the same organization that gave Brent Venables an extension and a $45 million, up the buyout to $45 million this offseason. So that was not great. I mean, they're not batting 1,000, not even close. But it's the transfer portal era. If they just make a good hire whenever they get the money, when the next guy comes around, portal era, you can build that up pretty fast. Look at Kurt Signetti at Indiana this year, right? And what he's been able to do. You can do it. You can definitely do it. And they have a lot of tradition to sell, but they are light years away from where they want to be right now. And you can trace it all back to conference realignment. It hurts the big boys too. Remember when I mentioned Lincoln Riley and USC? They are 5-9 in their last 14 games. USC has lost 9 of its last 14 games. And this is the program that really set everything in motion in the Pac-12. Like, tons of things happen. I understand. Pac-12 fans will tell, like Larry Scott, and there are a bunch of factors there. But USC was ultimately driving the bus on that. They wanted out. They fancied themselves better. They wanted the Big Ten money and publicity and prestige and all of that. And they thought, we're too good for this Pac-12 joint, even though our program has kind of sucked for the better part of a decade and a half. That's what USC fancied itself. They got their wish. They bullied their way into the Big Ten. And now here they are going 5-9 with a very expensive, very high profile coach. And a lot of it is because, look, the problem for USC is not just, hey, we lost the game at Michigan. Hey, we lost the game at home to Penn State. Those were close losses. You can understand. Michigan does. I mean, they're pretty bad this year. But those are more understandable. But now you've got to do this cross-country travel thing. Like, hey, we got our game against Michigan. We're going to get our games against Ohio State, whoever. We're going to get our games against Penn State. But you also have these games against Minnesota and Maryland where you got to go travel, and you're going across a couple time zones, and you got to go play those games too, and you're losing them. You're losing them. Whether or not the travel you feel like is a legitimate excuse or not for USC, it is a complicating factor. It makes it tougher, and that's because of realignment. And John Wilner's been pointing this out all year. Teams are well under 500 traveling across multiple time zones in the Big Ten. It is tough. And when Lincoln Riley already has this program at a position where, despite their talent advantage, they don't have an overwhelming advantage over a lot of these teams, the margins are still thin enough that stuff like that can really affect you. It's not good. Plus, just like, who cares? Minnesota and Maryland are nothing against those programs, but those are not names that will get USC excited to play them. And then you throw in the travel, like, we're traveling a long way to do that. There's not a history built up with some of these schools, like there would be more mid-level Pac-12 schools if you're going to play Oregon State, if you're going to play Stanford, Cal, whatever. That's that's going to at least be a little bit more of a draw because there's some sort of tie there. You don't have that to Minnesota and Maryland. So it's probably tougher to get guys up for those games. And now USC is in a position where Lincoln Riley's got a massive buyout, and he's busy losing almost 2 out of every 3 games right now. So USC wanted to be at the big boy table, but they're not ready for that. So the checks are cashing. I mean, the SEC check, the Big Ten check, they cash for Oklahoma and USC, but how much fun is it? How much fun is this, Oklahoma and USC fans? The highlight of Oklahoma's season is putting some Michael Hawkins drive in like Sooner Lore forever to beat one of the worst Power 5 teams out there that has an unreal skill at losing games. Auburn is a world-class game-losing team this year. They're outstanding, gold medal caliber. That's the highlight of your season. You just scored 9 points and got blown out at home by South Carolina. I hope the checks cash, man. I hope it looks great in your bank account. I hope it does, because it's not that much fun on the field. And the same goes for USC. Conference realignment has consequences, people. If there's one thing for you to remember from all of this, it's that conference realignment has consequences.